Autumn for Black Tree, written and read by Oliver Tonic. This is a completed novella, read as a series. Enjoy the story from here on, or start from the beginning with the first episode. And now, back to the tale. Episode 6. Something in the Air. First thing in the morning, Barley readied himself to go to the palace. He dressed in his night garb for official business and made his way to the entrance, past the guards and into the royal quarters. There he found Paxis waiting on Queen Caporia with breakfast while she tended to something over a table with some of her other servants. Barley let his eyes drift towards the servant girl who hadn't seen him approach. He always thought Paxis looked so beautiful, even in the simple clothes she always wore. The queen's back was turned to him, so Barley kneeled and spoke. "Your Highness, I have a report." The queen turned to look at him and smiled. So did Paxis. "Speak, Barley Knight." Barley rose. "Forgive my intrusion, madam. I just wanted to—" He trailed off as he saw what was on the table. It was another strange scarecrow, like the one he'd seen at Toka's farm. The servants were fastening it to a post while flowers lay all around it. "I'm sorry," he said, "but may I ask what this is?" The queen's eyebrows lifted in surprise as she looked back at her work. "Oh, this? These are our party favors." She picked up some flowers and petals and rubbed them gently between her fingers. "We're having a ball and inviting several dignitaries from nearby lands to attend. As we're hosting, we're giving out party favors for them to take back with them." Barley was confused. He thought it seemed a very large and strange gift of any kind, much less one to present to dignitaries at a ball. "I noticed these at a couple of your farms already," he said. The queen smiled. "Well, you of all people would know how much we need to do some scaring around here." Barley stroked his chin. "Right. Actually, that's why I'm here. I did a bit of scouting last night." "Ah, yes. My husband already told me about how you tried to assist them last night. That dastardly thing. Whatever will we do with it? The poor people are being starved out." "Yeah, it's something to see," said Barley. "But I'm actually concerned you may have two monsters roaming your land." "Two?" "Yes, I think one is burning up crops, and the other appears to be eating crops." "Eating the crop?" The queen sat up very straight. "I've heard no complaints of such a thing." "It's definitely happening. Toga's farm was hit just last night at the same time as I was chasing your firecat." "Well, how sure are you of this other creature? Did you catch sight of it?" Barley described to her the state of the crop when he had returned and how he thought he saw perhaps the arm of the creature. Paxis was listening closely. The queen stared at him blankly. "So you haven't seen the other creature, then?" she said. Barley frowned. "No, not precisely, but clearly you've got something else out there." The queen sighed and grabbed the arm of the scarecrow, pinning a daisy to it. "I don't know what to tell you. The people claim they're distressed by a monster of fire that burns the fields. I suggest you focus on what you actually saw." Barley's eyebrows furrowed. Paxis cleared her throat and spoke up. "I'm interested in whatever else you've found. That sounds strange, Barley. Maybe you could take a deeper look." Her eyes turned to the queen. "From me." The queen scoffed and looked back at Barley with a smirk. "But of course, if it is the will of your savior," she said as she turned around on the bench and got back to tending her project. Barley looked at the back of her head and then looked at Paxis, who had a tea tray in her hand and was smiling brightly at him. Barley smiled back and shook his head. "Enjoy your day, Your Highness," he said. He turned around and left the room. For the rest of the day and the next few, Barley spent his time visiting the residents' farms. He was searching to see if he could sort out any kind of pattern. If the beasts lived in the forest around the farms, perhaps he could find a general exit point. Maybe a grouping of trees where either of the creatures could be exiting from. If he could find that, he may be able to find a den. The problem was there wasn't any sort of pattern that way. This seemed strange to him. In his experience, monsters with the mind of a beast would ordinarily operate on instinct, in which case they would have a specific area that they would consider their territory and carry on business as usual in their minds. They may be tormenting the locals, but they likely didn't realize that. What was odd about the crop damage was it wasn't localized at all. He saw that many of the farms seemed to be being attacked regularly and almost evenly, and some were very spaced apart. The few consistencies that he could find, though, were very notable. It seemed that each farm that was burned was also eaten from. He also found that it appeared the firecat always started in a food crop, and then the burn marks always made their way into each farm's mushroom crop. The eaten portions of the mushrooms were severely reduced at times due to how much the firecat had burned. The strangest thing he found, though, was the people's reaction to the pelodious mushrooms. He spent a lot of time in the market talking to villagers and trying to figure out the strange custom of cultivating a poisonous crop without market value. No one could tell him a medicinal use for it or even a use as a pesticide. Everyone just had them and were proud of their produce. They saw it as a civic duty, as though they were contributing to the community somehow. Although a few commented on their beauty as a reason for having them, most all parroted the same line that Toka did, that it was by royal decree. He asked a few of the farmers that were victimized about their crop of mushrooms being eaten. He could never quite get a straight answer on that. No one would totally acknowledge what he was referring to. Often they would cite the fire monster and lament its devastation, but when he referred to anything actually coming by and turning what's left of the mushrooms to mulch, they seemed to not understand what he was talking about. The last detail that concerned him, but was not really his priority, were the strange scarecrows. He realized they were not an isolated occurrence. Every single farm with a crop of mushrooms had amongst it a mushroom scarecrow baking in the sun. It was always generally centralized amongst the crop and not normally decorated in the fancy way the queen had been working on. When he asked about them, the locals said they received them when starting their crop each season and it was supplied by the royal family. He learned they wear out, with the plumpness of the body eventually withering into a dried husk. For scaring purposes, this didn't seem so bad to Barley, but they said the king and queen insisted they stayed looking pristine to match the aesthetic of the land. It was a mark of the town, after all, and they didn't want it falling into disrepair. Barley had never heard of a custom so odd. On the third night, Barley slept soundly on his bed when he suddenly began to cough. It was light at first until it built into a coughing fit that eventually woke him up. His eyes snapped open to the light of the moon streaming in his window. He tried to take a deep breath, but it was useless. He felt like he was choking on something. It felt like smoke in his lungs and it burned his nose. He waved his hands in the air and scrambled to locate the source. He rolled out of his bed and fell to the ground. He got up and ran to his front door to see if something was going on outside. There was nothing. It was so bad, he half expected a bonfire of hair or something to be happening right outside his door. It occurred to him that although it felt something like smoke, he couldn't see any, and it didn't smell like smoke. Whatever it was seemed worse when the door was open, so he slammed it shut and scrambled to his window and shuttered it closed. He found every open or cracked window in the cottage and fastened it shut. He found himself breathing through his night attire, holding the cloth of his shirt to his nose and mouth to create a desperate makeshift gas mask. He sat in the middle of the room in the dark, breathing as slowly as he could so as not to start up a coughing fit again. He worried he wouldn't be able to catch his breath again in this air if he did. Gradually, it became easier to breathe, and he allowed himself to cough into his shirt. It felt wet. Barley was concerned he may have coughed blood. He rushed to a lantern and lit it with some flint. In the glow, he could see his white shirt was slightly stained with something, but it wasn't red. He drew the cloth and light closer and saw a shade of green. It was a watery liquid substance that had come from his mouth that had marked his shirt with a light forest green. He coughed again and found his hand came up clean. In fact, he could breathe clearly now. He went to the window near his bed and cracked it, letting in a stream of moonlight. In came fresh air, like nothing at all had happened. Hey guys, it's Oliver. Thank you so much for listening. Give me a like if you enjoyed and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll have weekly episodes up until all 18 parts of the story are fully released, so stay tuned.